There's no take two. There's no just a little more purple. Warts and all, you've downloaded the VO Radio Show.
Welcome to the final VO Radio Show for 2015. Andrew Peters here in Melbourne. Up in Sydney is Robbo.
How are you, AP?
I'm very well, and you?
I'm really well, thank you. It's Christmas time. How can things not be good, right?
Well, if your sack is full, then it's a good thing. But yes, it is our Christmas end-of-year special, and we do have a special guest for the whole show, and this is a good one for people like myself, who sits on the other side of the glass, working from a home studio. We'll get a few good tips from the people who know, and of course Robbo being one of them, being an audio engineer. Our guest today, apart from being an audio engineer, is also one of the owners of Source Elements, and currently we're using Source Connect now. It is Robert Marshall. G'day to you.
Hello.
How's Chicago? Is it windy?
Global warming is taking over. It's a nice summer over here. It finally got a little bit cold today, but it's strangely warm, actually.
That's bizarre.
Yep.
Now, we, as well as using Source Connect, we're also using another neat little piece of software on my end, because we're recording here in my studio, called Source Nexus. Do you want to run us through that quickly?
Sure. So Nexus is what we call an application audio router. So it's allowing you to take the audio out of Chrome, which is what Source Connect now runs on, and feed it directly into Pro Tools, and also take the audio out of Pro Tools and feed it back into Chrome. So it makes it a lot like Source Connect Standard and Source Connect Pro, which do operate as plugins. But effectively, Source Connect now can turn basically any application into a plugin for Pro Tools or Cubase, Nuendo, VST and AU-driven applications as well. And so in your case, the way we have it set up so that we're hooked up in stereo, you're actually able to record me on a separate track from Andrew from you. So you can have a discrete recording of the full interview.
All on the one Source Connect Now session, which is a very neat trick, can I just say. Can I ask you just quickly, what inspired you to start Source Elements?
Oh boy. So my background is as a sound design mix engineer, mainly working on TV spots. Doing that, we were always doing ISDN sessions. And so that was in the middle and late 90s. We'd finish work and go get a beer and talk about stuff. And one of the things that would come up was how crazy expensive ISDN was. And the studio that I was working at was very busy, and there was $1,000 and multi-$1,000 ISDN bills. And so I was fresh out of college, and I'm like, why can't you do this over the internet? ISDN's only 128K, and we have this massive T1 line with 1.5 megabits. And after talking about it enough, I did some proof of concepts and proved that you could stream audio over the internet. We had actually looked for some programming resources, and we'd gotten various quotes. A lot of them were awfully expensive. And then a good friend of mine, Rebecca, was in town, and we were getting another beer and telling her about this thing I want to make. And she, she's a great musician, but she has a background in programming as well. And she kind of listened to the whole idea and went, oh yeah, I can do that, or we can do that. And it wouldn't be that expensive. And she was able to basically put together a team and manage the project and actually get a first beta version. Of course, it wasn't as inexpensive as first predicted, but maybe that was the thing that we needed to, even in the first place, just put our money on the table and start the project. And so that's how it started. And that was, I believe, around 2004. Very early 2005, we released the first version of Source Connect.
How did you go raising capital to get the business going? So
it was funded at that time by myself and a lot of the partners who were at the post house that I had been working at the time. So that's called the place is called Cutters. It's a great place. They now have several international locations, and so we discussed it, and we had a vision for what this could be, and it was basically privately funded.
So 2004, you started the company. Have you noticed that in the last few years it's tended to take off more than in the beginning in terms of downloads of your product and sales of your product? Because it seems that the last couple of years has really seen a massive increase in the amount of people running home studios.
Yeah, I'd say so. There's been kind of a couple of bumps. The initial push was definitely very tough. I think that when we started Source Elements, that was also around the first year that Skype showed up as well.
Right.
I think the internet was barely ready for this kind of thing. It was able to be run by studios who had really good internet connections, who had a staff that could manage the internet connection properly. But initially, when the home voice talents were trying to use the application, if your internet wasn't really up to snuff, it often led to a bad experience. And then I'd say right around maybe 2008, there was a significant uptick in the quality of the internet, and things began working a lot better. And then the uptake in the software got a lot better, and things really moved up and up and up from there. I mean, actually, in the whole history of the company, there was only one down year, which actually was 2008, but that was more because of the whole financial downturn.
Yeah.
And then moving forward, and especially in the more recent years, the demise of ISDN, we kind of knew it was going to happen, but there was no proof. It was just a hunch that this can't last. This is old technology. There's much better ways to do this. And then the most recent years now, at least in the U.S., a lot of the major carriers, the telephone carriers, have pretty much announced that they're getting rid of it. And some of them are very aggressively, purposely moving the prices way up to basically force people to drop their lines voluntarily. And then other carriers in the U.S. are saying things like, if you drop your line, you won't get a new one, and no new lines. And, it's a lot harder to get ISDN lines, and because of the costs. And so there's a whole nother push to move towards IP. And so we've been definitely on the forefront of like IP solutions, mainly for post-production.
It's interesting because when I saw Source Connect first, I stumbled across it completely by accident on the internet, and I went into a studio in Port Melbourne, here in Melbourne, a studio called Mike Sound. And I walked in, I knew Mike Slater was a techie guy. He was always looking for something new. And I said to him, I've just seen this new thing. It's called Source Connect. And he moved away from his computer screen. There was your site on his screen. He goes, I'm checking it out right now. So we actually, were probably really early in the piece, we bought the Source Connect. And we actually did some testing with each other to see how it worked. And we were both very happy with it, and that was many years ago.
Sure. And Australia actually had a lot of uptake on it early on because there's a fair amount of film work that gets done in Australia as well. And the ISDN connections internationally are extremely expensive. So a lot of the early use was really cutting costs down on ISDN sessions that were being used for ADR internationally. And I remember there was a great engineer, I think his name was Simon Leadley, and I'm probably going to get the studio wrong, but I believe it was either Fox Studios or Trackdown Studios.
Trackdown.
One of those studios. Trackdown. And he was using it on some major films, I think like Happy Feet and things like that, and he was using it with another studio in LA called Buzzies. And so that was another kind of early use, was just to cut down on costs. Even though ISDN was an option, it was like, would you like to spend $600 today on a phone bill or zero? Or whatever the budget was.
Yeah. While we're talking about users, this podcast goes out to, sort of a voiceover talent who have their own home studios. Are you finding more and more that people are beginning to sort of drop their ISDN lines and pick up this sort of service?
Absolutely. It's definitely happening a lot. And a big reason for that is, like I said, the phone companies are moving the prices up. They're not allowing new lines to be installed. So they're doing all kinds of things like that. And the other thing is that, people are actually starting to find that in many ways it's a better way to work. It's mobile. ISDN is very not mobile.
Yeah.
It is, when it's working properly, and the internet has now gotten to a point where it really does work properly, it's higher quality. Like to separate dropouts and internet glitches from the actual quality of the codec, we're able to push much higher bandwidth than just 128K. So ISDN is kind of limited to that 128K. I remember I was doing an ADR session, and we were using Source Connect. And actually, what happened is the far end studios, their internet went down, in the middle of the connection, and we had to switch back over to ISDN. And so at that point, we couldn't use the built-in syncing feature that's in Source Connect, and we had to use only one channel for the voice and one channel for time code. And immediately, my clients are like, "Why does it sound like crap?"
Yeah, and
I was like, "Well, that's 64K ISDN because the other 64K is being used for time code."
Yeah,
and so there's a lot of workflow advantages to it. On the pro side, you can have conferenced connections. It can control the transports for ADR. It has a whole system that probably doesn't get used as much as it should called the Queue Manager, which tracks all the recordings and then can not just fix any dropouts if they do occur, but it can replace all the recordings and any edits done of those recordings with the uncompressed audio directly off the microphone from the source side. And then, there's upper versions of Source Connect. There's one called Pro X that can do surround sound. So that gets used for remote mixing situations where, someone's mixing a movie maybe in California and the producer is in New York and they want to sit in on the mix in real time. And so they can stream 5.1 and 7.1 with picture sync right across the internet, which is basically... You can't do that with ISDN, and if you can, it's going to take a whole lot of ISDN lines and a big painful setup. So
yeah,
it's got many workflow advantages beyond just being cost effective.
And of course, one of the really cool features of Source Connect is the bridging service, right?
Right. So bridging has been always a legacy thing that it ties back into the legacy ISDN network, and it's provided voice talent with the ability to be completely mobile. So early on, we had a voice actor named Joe Cipriano who, if I'm right, he did a bridge from a cruise ship in the Mediterranean through Source Connect to an ISDN box. And I if I remember right, the latency was insane. Like 2 seconds or something because the cruise ship used like satellite internet. But yeah, so bridging allows not just for voice talent who don't have ISDN, but those who do have ISDN who just don't want to be chained to their ISDN box and they do want to take a vacation.
I can hear AP's mind ticking over as we speak. Where can I go now?
Well, it's interesting because I know Joe, and I've actually seen him working from the back of a car on the side of a freeway. Yes,
he did that too. He's been very pioneering, and he's great. But yes, I remember. I mean, he's so busy, and he's on it all the time. He was a guest speaker at the conference, and I remember he basically showed up at the hotel, and everyone's in the lobby saying, "Hey, how are you?" This and that. He's like, "I'm doing really well. I have to go up to my room and set up because I have a session in 10 minutes." And like his laptop and his Wi-Fi modem and Source Connect, and boom, he's like, "Next on Fox," or whatever, And he's extremely busy, and he really embraced it because he was one of the first users. I think I connected with him, and before we put a sample rate converter into Source Connect, when I first connected with him, he sounded really low because I forget what the mismatch was. He was at 44.1 and I was at 48, and I remember going, we'll need to do a sample rate conversion automatically for those people who aren't at the same sample rates.
Yeah. We spoke with Nick Tate, and he talked about how busy Don LaFontaine was driving around in his limo all over LA doing, movie promos. But how much different would his life have been had he had Source Connect? I
mean, he did end up using Source Connect at the end, and there's a really nice sort of philanthropic studio for training voice actors and whatnot, and they have Source Connect over there. They actually were using his old copy plus a couple of donated copies, and so he definitely ended up using it towards the end in his home. But yeah, he was. I mean, he's a legend.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, talking about home studios, because, of course, now we have Source Connect, which makes working from home much easier. The issue, of course, is what is a home studio? No one really has the definitive concept of what it is.
I think it's one that's effective for recording. I mean, if you don't have a whole bunch of kids in the house and you're not living in a city, you can probably get away with just properly treating a corner of your room, like, getting a good door and maybe making it fairly soundproof. But I don't think you have to go to the extent of floating floors or even necessarily getting a booth if you can control the echoes in a room. To me, a good studio is one that's effective. It's, a good mic and these days, it's amazing the difference in microphones compared to the cost of those microphones is staggering. So you can start to approach some pretty effective setups at really low pricing, a good stereo interface that lets you get your microphone in, a pair of headphones, a treated corner, a computer, as long as you have everything placed well so that your computer is not making noise and getting into your microphone, and you can definitely do some damage at home.
It's interesting because I was thinking about this before, because you still work as an audio engineer. Is that correct?
I do, absolutely.
Yeah. So what I was getting to is I've seen a few, sort of forums and chats and stuff about working from home or working in the studio. And one of the things I saw the other day was someone talking about EQing. And the response from one of the other engineers was, why are you EQing so early? And in fact, why are you EQing at all? If you've got a good microphone, a good room, and you place the microphone properly, and a good preamp, and then a bit of compression, you shouldn't really need to EQ at all. It should be left alone. How would you like it to be delivered?
Microphone, preamp, maybe a high-pass filter, and that's it. No compressor, no EQ. Because anything you can do, I can do. But if you do it, then I'm tied. So just get your levels right. And that's the other thing. It's like, don't worry about, like, with 24-bit, you can be fairly conservative with your level and still keep your noise floor, of the converter in a nice place. Because, the reality is, certainly in theory, you could record at 24-bit at minus 48 decibels on the meter. And at that point, you would be at the same resolution as 16-bit. So you don't have to worry about, hitting 0, certainly, or even minus 6. You can hang out at minus 10, minus 6. That's a nice nominal level. And I would say don't touch it. At the most, a high-pass filter, but certainly don't compress it, and there's no need to EQ it, because that's all stuff that the engineer can decide later at what they need for that particular spot. The only place I see where processing becomes necessary is sometimes with the promo actors. Those things are moving so fast, and sometimes they're not really even going through the hands of a mixer. Sometimes it's like the Avid editor puts that voice in there and sends it out, and that's the mix, is just coming right off of, Media Composer or Final Cut. And so in those situations, a lot of those promo voice talents do say, like, I need this compressor and I need this EQ because they need it processed already.
Yeah.
But I would say that's maybe the only industry. And maybe the only other one is like, a remote contribution from a radio talent where, again, things are moving fast and the guy just needs to push the fader up and say, here's my guest, let's talk. But if it's a spot, if it's ADR, anything that's going to be thoughtfully mixed later, don't touch it. No,
Yeah.
It's like, yeah.
Let me throw this in the mix just quickly. I finished off a video yesterday for a client of mine. Now, it was a 3-minute video. And it was voiceover and SOT, so basically, people talking to camera. Now, the original voiceover we recorded here in the studio a couple of weeks ago, so they could take it away and edit to it. And the deadline was yesterday afternoon, and the final cut went to client for approval yesterday morning, and came back, we need this voiceover changed. So couldn't get the voice. So long story short, couldn't get the voiceover back in here to the studio. And the producer said, you've got a home studio. Fantastic. Just drop down this line and send it to us and we'll stick it in. I can't tell you the difference in quality between the two. The original recording here in the studio, nice and clean, everything there. What came back from his home studio was thin, crappy, awful, just terrible. Did everything I could to save it, send it back to the client, get the phone call yesterday afternoon. The two voiceovers sound really different. One's really thin. What's going on? What have you done? It's like, I haven't done anything, guys. You give me a shit recording. I'm stuck with a shit recording. It's just the way it is. Yeah,
there's that problem, and that's sort of every audio engineer's nightmare.
Yeah.
And I see this sometimes. It's like, we've booked a voice talent, and he's got a home studio. And sometimes producers who have the budget, they're like, you know what? Just tell the guy to go to this studio. Like, what city does he live in? I know a good studio in that city. Just tell him to go there. Because things are moving fast and they don't want to have any surprises. And so if it's in the budget to pay a studio $250 for the session and a little bit of gas for the guy to drive down there, that is way less stress on the production side of things if they don't have to worry about what am I going to run into. So I do see that. But that being said, there are plenty of voice talent who have their stuff together.
Oh, absolutely.
I'd
agree.
They invest a lot of money,
Yep, absolutely.
You have that experience, and then that's in the back of your head, and then all of a sudden it's like, I just don't even want to have that ever happen again. Send them to a studio.
Yep. Yeah, I actually was sitting there thinking Source Connect sort of could have saved my ass, because if we had it connected directly to record the pickup, it would have been, oh, listen, this is never going to work. Get out of there, go find a studio.
Right, or you could have been like, hey, you know what? You need to get way closer to your microphone,
whatever. Yeah,
and maybe we can make it work. Yeah. Exactly.
But the trouble is, there's probably some hideous setup that person has. That's the angle I'm trying to get at. Is that what is the definition of what we should perceive as a quality home studio? Because if you say you're a professional voiceover with a home studio, then to be a professional, your home studio should also be of quality.
Part of it is also knowing your setup, and so like here's a tough lesson. Essentially, a story I heard. They recorded a spot. They hire the talent. The guy had his Pro Tools system to record himself locally. But for some reason, his Pro Tools system couldn't record himself locally. He was having troubles with his hard drive. He kept on getting 9032 errors with his Pro Tools system. So he couldn't record. But he saw his microphone. His microphone was going into Pro Tools nice and strong. And on his codec in his computer, he saw his voice going into there. But he didn't realize that the codec was set to receive the laptop microphone, not the microphone hooked up to his M-Box. And so somehow or another, they end up with, we have to go, and if you're recording a backup, great, and the backup didn't work because Pro Tools failed and the remote recording was screwed up because the guy didn't have the proper input going into his codec.
Yeah, I've done that myself, actually.
And here's the basic rub. It's like, I think there's two edges to this, which is if you're the voice talent and you're going to have a home studio, you basically are taking on some level of the task of being the engineer, and you have to embrace that. And doesn't mean that you have to be the end-all engineer, but you do have to be able to do some level of engineering and make sure things are correct. And the other thing is that, well, if you're the voice talent and you have a home studio, you're investing in all that equipment, and that is, in a sense, above and beyond your talents as a voice actor. And maybe there should be a fee for providing that and effectively, in a sense, saving your client that money from having to send you to a studio anyways. And little simple things, it's like, like a common thing when you record a voice talent at home is, okay, you're recording them and then, oh, I missed that. You said that perfectly, but I wasn't rolling. Can you send that back to me? And maybe the voice talent is actually recording a backup, but usually they're not able to figure out how to send it back down the line. They're not routed. So like, oh yeah, here's a playback, boom, which would be a very standard thing if they were at a studio. Like, oh yeah, you need playback on that one. Here's take 5, play it back. You got that? Great. Let's keep on rolling. And those kinds of things are things that would be nice if voice talent became more fluid with those types of things that can come up in a session, which would kind of, for some engineers, they would consider that, well, if you're taking on this job of being the studio, here's some of the things that can be needed in a session.
Now you're scaring me.
I have expectations.
Yeah, look, I think you're right.
Great expectations.
I think if you do take on that role, you've at least got to take on the role of quality control. Even if you can't, do playback and all that sort of stuff, you've still got to have an ability to listen for, errors or whatever that may be occurring that may not necessarily be picked up at the other end. Don't you think? Like a thin, crappy sound or, whatever.
It's that old saying, live by the sword, die by the sword. It's like if you have that studio, it could be your greatest asset, but it can also be a source of great embarrassment if not handled properly.
Correct. Yes. You're not pointing the finger at me, are you, Robert?
I didn't say anything.
Look, we won't go into it, folks, but AP, buy a Mac.
I do have a Mac. And it stops the door slamming. No, I do have Macs. I have laptops, but I use a PC for recording.
Oh.
Yeah, I mean, that's just Windows being really finicky. I mean, we were trying to download an older version of Chrome, and we found the download for the older version of Chrome, and then Chrome, you install it, and the Windows machine decides just to update it immediately.
I don't care what software.
Or we couldn't install the older
Yeah, I don't
version
care
of
what
Chrome.
software you want to load up. I'm going to load this one up.
I'm sorry, Dave. I can't do that.
Yeah, sorry, Hal.
So listen, let me throw a question at you,
yes.
Robert. You've been in business since 2004. So if anyone out there wants to find you, source-elements.com is the place to go, right? What is,
Exactly.
out of all the software that's up there that we can find, what's the one piece of software that's really going to sort of make my home studio crank?
Wow, there's a couple. I mean, specifically from the voice talent's point of view.
Yeah, definitely.
I think Source Nexus is an excellent, very flexible tool. It lets you patch applications between each other and do things that would normally require, an external mixer and a bunch of audio cables. So that's a very cool tool. I think Source Zip is very interesting. I think that you guys were the other day talking about something where you needed to transfer a file. And the nice thing about that is it can make transferring a file extremely fast because it can compress it, but keep it lossless and still knock it down in half. And even though internet speeds are really up these days, still, if you're talking about a big session, you have a gigabit or a gigabyte of audio to transfer to somebody, and you can knock that down to 500 megs. You've knocked down your upload download time by half. So Source Zip is pretty interesting, very useful for that type of purpose. And, it's like $50. So it's just a good utility. Like Source Connect is is our flagship product, as we say. And then Source Live is a pretty strong second contender for our flagship product. But there's a lot of little utilities. I put Nexus in that zone, and Source the TalkBack application, Source TalkBack, is great. Even if you're a voice talent and you might have your microphone in your booth, but you also have a pair of speakers hooked up outside your booth, and you want to talk to somebody. And a common situation is like, okay, let me go in my control room. Can you still hear me? And you're trying to yell to somebody through your booth microphone. Essentially,
Are you
when
pointing
you're
the finger at me again, Robert? It's Get Andrew afternoon.
Well, you opened yourself up to it, mate.
But it's nice to be able to have a talkback button, and some systems have it in hardware or software, but have a talkback in your control room. Those are just sort of nice, and they're all little utilities that we've made that, to me, just kind of fill in little gaps in what's available in hardware or software, and kind of makes the process easier. And
what's the one you're most proud of?
Oh, I'd say Source Connect for sure. Yeah, so it's had a great uptake. It's been used on, so many productions, from industrial videos and interviews and radio and really high-end movies and big ADR sessions. I was doing a tech support session the other day, and it was really cool because they were working on the movie trailer for the new Zoolander movie. And I'm hearing this in the background, and I'm knowing, like, I can't even talk about this, but isn't that cool?
Yeah.
Like, that movie's going to come out.
That's very
So
cool.
it's and like The Hobbit, and it's been used on so many cool things, and there's such a huge range, and it's given me the opportunity to meet so many people from around the world, you guys included. So it's like, that's definitely the one I'm the most proud of.
I'm going to change the questioning just slightly, because as you're an audio engineer, and it's probably a hard question to answer, but because we've talked about this before, what is your favorite combination of microphone and preamp?
Yeah, there is. So the 416 is excellent at providing a voice that just cuts through a mix. It's almost like it has this distortion to it. Probably from an audiophile point of view, it's not really the greatest, but it puts just an edge on the voice. It has a certain focus to it that is great, because it's one of those mics that doesn't actually need a lot of EQ, and it picks up a great mid-range and just slices through a big mix. And that's probably, 416. As far as preamps go, there's a lot of good ones. I've enjoyed using the mic pre's from Millennia. I personally own a couple of, they're rather obscure, but they're really nice mic preamps from Crookwood, who's kind of a boutique manufacturer in England. And then John Hardy makes an extremely great mic preamp, very fast, bright top end to it. And like a lot of those things start to come down to what's your voice character and what do you need? Something warmer, the The John Hardy isn't necessarily going to be something that is warm, but it's going to be extremely accurate. If anything, maybe its fault will be like every little spit mouth noise will be picked up. But those are three, solid state mic preamps that I really like a lot. When you get into the music stuff, then you start to look for a lot more color and not something that's necessarily, trying to just slice through the mix and make your job easier in that way. But, you're looking for something that adds a certain depth to the recording. So that's a whole different game. And those become more like paintbrushes. And what do I want? This fat brush, this skinny, thin line brush. So, but the 416 is a great one. Some other really good ones to consider are, the U87 is a standby. It's a little bit bigger, fatter sounding mic. So the top end isn't going to quite be there as much, but it's got a nice body to it for sure. You often see, 414s and things like that in studios, and a 414 is essentially never going to let anybody down. It's probably on the brighter side, but it still has a good depth to the low end and a very standard mic. Those three right there is like standard and can't go wrong with them.
Yeah. Do you ever record with tube mics on tube preamps, like the double tube?
Like right now?
Yeah.
All the time. And I've done shootouts with $2,000 mics versus $150 mics. And it's really sometimes hard to tell the difference. A really good example of this is, and this gets more on the music side, but so there's the Neumann KM 184, which is a great small diaphragm condenser mic for, great for drum overheads and acoustic instruments and orchestra recordings. And then there's these Octava, I think they're MC12s or MC012, same type of microphone, small diaphragm. The cardioid version of those things are really hard to tell apart. There's probably a 6 decibel noise floor difference, but if you're recording something that's already pretty loud and noise floor isn't your issue, you're comparing I forget what the price point of a KM184 is, but it's easily approaching $1,000 to a microphone that's, $150. Yeah. And the performance difference is not what the price difference is. And so it's interesting. You can definitely get away with using, if you know what you're doing, certainly you can get a great recording off of a not very expensive setup.
Now, you also run the support for Source Elements, is that correct?
I'm kind of the pinch hitter support. So I get called in when it tends to get to be more, Pro Tools and sometimes there's, some guys on a movie stage and, some of these guys have been doing this for 30 years and they can just talk circles around some people and they have huge setups that, you have to be in this industry for a long time to have had to deal with setups like that, like multi-operator Pro Tools systems and things like that. So I'll get involved with those. If things get backlogged, I'll be able to jump in. Certainly not mainline support, but certainly help out. We pride ourselves on providing excellent support, so as much as possible if there's a need.
Yeah, so the question I was going to throw at you was, you and I both being professionals, we're both running Pro Tools rigs, but in home studios out there, I was wondering if you were sort of seeing a trend towards any other sort of software or where be heading in terms of their doors.
So I think the first thing a home studio actor needs to decide is whether or not they're going to have to edit or if they're just capturing voice and sending files off. Because if they're just capturing voice and sending files off, really all they need is something like, Twisted Wave or, for that matter, practically QuickTime just to record themselves and there's your file, You don't really need anything. If you're getting into more complex setups, things like where you're either doing a patch, but you also have to have clients on a phone patch at the same time, or you're needing to provide edits, or in a session where you need to provide, playback to your hookup, and so you need certain routing capabilities. That's when you do get into a DAW or a software that definitely has a mixer involved and not just a 2-track, wave recording editing software. So at that point, I think that they need to decide what works for their price point and what works for their knowledge base. And there's a number of ones that are pretty popular in the voiceover world. I think Adobe Audition is one that pops up a lot. And I think that kind of came in a lot from the radio industry. And also maybe because its heritage was this Cool Edit Pro, which was possibly initially a free application. My personal opinion is that there's this stigma that Pro Tools is really confusing and overkill, and I don't need all that. And my personal opinion is that I find Adobe Audition much more confusing than Pro Tools. It's easy for me to say that because I've been using Pro Tools for too long. I don't want to say how long, but since version 2. But I do find that as I've had to troubleshoot and work with other packages, I find them to be much more limiting, and I do actually like Pro Tools a lot. There's a lot of strong contenders in there, but even from Australia, Fairlight's an excellent recording software, and if you were doing voice editing all day long, that's an amazing editing software. Extremely capable, also extremely expensive, so it's not going to be for everybody. But I think Pro Tools actually is not. I think it kind of gets a bad rap for being overly complicated, and I find it actually to be as good or better than all the rest, even though they're,
Yeah. Well, I think that's the charm of Pro Tools, though, isn't it? Is Pro Tools can be as simple or as complicated as you want it to be. I mean, you can have, like I have, a number of different templates for different, recording scenarios or different formats that you're mixing for, or you can have a simple mic in, bus out, away we go setup.
I do like that aspect of Pro Tools, which is it's also, I find it's like with Photoshop, where you get two guys who run Photoshop, and they've both been using Photoshop for 20 years. And they can both be like, well, what about this? And the other guy's like, I didn't even know about that. And Pro Tools has that depth to it. Yeah. Like, there's just so much you can do in Pro Tools. And if you're a guy who's doing MIDI stuff, there's like all this stuff that I barely pay attention to and I know only on the surface. Whereas conversely, like on the post-production side, there's all kinds of stuff that I know about Pro Tools that maybe a guy doing music doesn't know as much. And so it's a very deep program. But the beauty of it, to be honest, is like there's two windows. There's an editor and a mixer, and that's it. And it doesn't have this confusion of so many windows and different things. And I find that's what happens with a lot of the other software packages is I find them to be much more confusing than Pro Tools. But again, like I said, I've been sitting with Pro Tools for so long that it's really easy for me to say it's easy because it is easy to me,
Yeah. Look, I run Audition. It sits on my Mac only because if I'm out somewhere and I need to open up a mix or something that I've done for a client earlier, like just a stereo mix to listen or to resend or to whatever, I have it sitting there. But I would hate to have to mix on it on a daily basis. I do find it overly complicated.
Yeah, it's got a lot of windows. It's got that separate edit window compared to the multi-track window, and then it has this rack for your plugins and stuff. But do you know what the one that's really impressive is Reaper? I don't know if you've played with that at all.
No.
Oh my gosh. It's, I think for the consumer version, they want like $40 for it. And, for the professional version, which is still the same version, they just try to have everyone be honest about what are you using this for. I mean, it might be $250. And it has features that Pro Tools has yet to implement. It has features that Pro Tools only implemented this year in Pro Tools 12 that Reaper's had forever. A good example is like, if you have a whole multi-track mix, and this is more of a music feature, but if you have a whole multi-track mix with Reaper, for the longest time, you could just say, give me separate flattened splits of every track. That feature just arrived in Pro Tools 12. Another example of something that Reaper can do that still Pro Tools can't do, at least not with busing it through an aux track to another track, is you can take a whole plugin chain, and then when you enable the track to record in Reaper, you can decide if you're going to record the input or the output of that plugin chain. So you can basically record a processed signal right on one track. And it's got all these things that it can do that it's insane for a $40 application. And it's a little bit daunting. Again, it's, it probably looks scary to some people, but if you dig into it, it's, there's software packages that cost $1,000 that do the same thing as what Reaper does for peanuts.
Well, if the Reaper was at my door, I would be scared. That was a techie
Well,
gag.
it's kind of interesting, though, with Pro Tools. It was a techie gag. I was just going to say, though, with Pro Tools moving to the inverted commas rental model, really, which is what they're doing, wanting a yearly subscription fee. Mm-hmm. It's interesting the other options that are out there, isn't it?
It is. I see the whole industry moving this way, and even Source Elements has been pushed this way. I understand it completely from the company's point of view. It's like, there's a big need for these companies to have reoccurring revenue. and even source elements included. It's hard to run a business model based on one-time sales. But that being said, from the consumer's point of view, I don't get it. I don't understand why anybody. I mean, unless you plan on using the software for a month and then you're done with it. But as soon as you get into an extended use of it, it just seems to me that it's a good way to pay more for it.
I think you're right. I think there is some confusion out there because, I mean, even me as a user, I look at my Pro Tools and I think, well, hang on, I've paid whatever I've paid for my software. You know, let's use Windows as an example, just for the sake of an argument, something that everybody understands. I download Windows 10. I pay for it. I put it on my machine. Except now, because I've had it for a year, you want me to cough up again and again and again and again. And I think, well,
I completely agree.
I don't have to pay per use.
I think you pay for your software, and that's something that's like, you know, I took a call from a user the other day, and they had Source Connect 3.0, and you know the call was basically like, I don't know, do I need to upgrade? And I got a session coming up in 20 minutes, and what do I do? And I was like, well, launch it and see what happens. And here we go. Yeah. And the guy was like on Windows 10. And so what happens a lot is people upgrade their system without thinking about all the residual effects of upgrading their system. And luckily it worked. And I was actually kind of amazed because it's like that there's a big generational gap between Source Connect 3.0, which was basically designed for Windows XP, and then Windows 10. There's a huge gap in there, and it worked. And so the thing is like, all right, well, you don't need to upgrade. It works for you. Go do your session. And you know, it's like I think that from the consumer's point of view, those people who get upset when they're like, oh, I can't believe I have to pay for an upgrade. This is ridiculous. Well, it's like, no, you upgraded something about your computer that stopped it from working. You know, like if you've changed something about your setup that causes the software that you have to not work anymore and you need an upgrade for that, that's perfectly reasonable for the software company to say, hey, there's an update fee for that new version. If it's not broken, don't change it. You know, it's like, I know that Apple is kind of like, hey, you need to update to Yosemite. And then like a week later, you need to update to El Capitan. It's like, is there a reason? Because if you don't need to, don't do it.
Exactly.
You know, and if subscribing to something gives you a certain level of comfort because you know you're always going to have the latest version, you know you're always going to have support, you know you're never going to possibly lose your license because it's always a renewed license. You know, there are certain, I guess, comforting things about running a subscription model, a certain clarity in that, but it's not economically, from the consumer's point of view, the best way to do it. I don't think.
Agree.
And that's just me thinking from their point of view, because I've always kind of viewed things as you know, a user. Source Connect was made, you know, because it was something that I wanted as a user, essentially.
Yeah.
I have at my feet a Mac 7100.
Wow.
with my favorite reverb card, which is a Lexicon Nuverb. It's like a Lexicon 300 on a Nubus card.
Huh?
And you know what? It's a great sounding reverb, and I love it, and I use it.
Yeah.
And another example is I've got a remote recording rig I use for, like, you know, stereo recording. I'll go to a concert. It's a PowerBook G4. with like a Motu 828 interface.
Yeah.
You know, it's like this, boom, 2 microphones, go record stereo, or if I need, it can record a couple of other tracks. Same thing. It just, the thing's like a tank. It keeps on running. It's like running Leopard. It does what I need it to do, and that way, you know, and I feel better about it too, because like sometimes I'm taking that thing on the road and, you know, it gets locked in my car and someone busts the window open and takes it. It's like, damn it. You took my $200 Macintosh.
That's right. But imagine if you had to keep paying $200 a year to have it, though. You know, that's getting back to the Pro Tools thing. That's the whole thing that drives me nuts. You know. Anyway, there you go. That's the bee in my bonnet.
I agree, and you know, it's kind of funny me sitting here with a software company that does offer rentals, but in all honesty, it's one of the reasons we offer rentals is because customers are like, we want rentals. Yeah. Give us rentals.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's like, okay.
Yeah.
Here you go. Source Connect Standard's available for $35 a month if that's what you really, really, really want.
But correct me if I'm wrong. If I rent your software, I'm actually contribute towards paying it off. Is that right?
Source Connect Pro has a rent-to-own option.
Yeah.
But Source Connect Standard is just a straight rent. It's because the Pro version's like $250 for 7 days, whereas the other one's effectively $35 for the whole month.
Right.
So and there is that flip side of it, which is in all honesty, the companies do need that reoccurring revenue. So that is a need, because as much as it's like the users want us to be there to make the next version of the software when they need that next version, and so it's very hard to develop software without any funding, trying to pay it all off after you make it and then try to sell it. Whereas if you have these constant rental incomes coming in, you have funds to push that product forward in a more constant velocity than these bursts of okay, can we gear up and can we make it to another push of development? And then we did it. Okay, now let's change our minds over to sales and really push that thing that we just sold. And so there becomes a better... it is a kind of symbiotic relationship with the customers and the software company, and that you can create a better flow of development that's more constant.
Now, I think we should probably get back to work and earn some money.
Yes.
Are we all in agreement with that?
I think so, yeah. No one rents my production skills, unfortunately.
No, they do not. But it's been great talking to you, Robert, and we really appreciate your time. And it's been an eye-opener for all of us, I think, on both sides of the glass.
Definitely.
Very cool. Well, I appreciate you guys inviting me, and it is an honor as well.
We'll get you back on the show.
I think we should. I think there's more to talk about.
2016.
Yeah.
Oh, there's tons. We could go on for hours.
Absolutely.
I can geek out. There's no doubt.
Yes.
Now, the other
this is quite true.
The other important thing to say, AP, is Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas or Happy Holidays.
Happy Holidays, yeah.
Do you say Merry Christmas, Robert, or do you say Happy Holidays?
Politically correct, I think you're doing Happy Holidays, but Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and... Happy Hanukkah and all those others that I can't even name.
Well, in 2016, Donald Trump may be your new president, so we won't worry about being PC. Well, you've got the Trump Tower in Chicago, haven't you?
Yeah. It's a beautiful building, actually. I think in the end it really did add to the Chicago skyline, and it's nicely done. But yeah.
Well, as I said, the headline, if he does become president, should be Tout de gras.
On that note,
I don't know. Yeah, I will refrain from.
On that note, I think we should sign off. If it's getting that desperate.
It is. We should do something Christmassy too. Do we want to end with a song, Robbo?
Yeah, I think we should, mate.
I'm not asking you to sing, by the way.
No, I wasn't going to sing, but I reckon the one we should play in tribute to an interview from earlier this year is the Pogues, don't you?
I think you're right. Our mate Chris Dickey was the engineer on the recording of this. The Pogues, Christmas in New York. Merry Christmas.
See you
Happy
next
holidays.
year.
See you in 2016.
It was Christmas Eve, babe, in the drunk tank. An old man said to me, won't see another one. And then he sang a song, the rare old mountain dew. I turned my face away and dreamed about you. Got on a lucky one, came in 18 to 1. I've got a feeling this year's for me and you. So happy Christmas. I love you, baby. I can see a better time when all our dreams come true.
They got cars big as bars, they got rivers of gold, but the windows right through you, it's no place for the old. When you first took my hand on a cold Christmas Eve, you promised me promise
Queen of New York City. When the band finished playing, they held out for more. Sinatra was swinging, all the drunk folk were singing. We kissed on the corner, then danced through the night. The boys of the NYPD choir were singing Go Away Babe, and the bells were ringing out for Christmas Day. Lying there almost dead on a dripping night bed.
You scumbag, you maggot, you cheap lousy faggot. Happy Christmas, you're ours. I pray God it's our loss.
The boys of the NYPD choir still singing Go Away Babe, and the bells are ringing out for Christmas Day. Could have been someone.
Well, so could anyone. You took my dreams from me when I first found you.
I kept them with me, babe. I put them with my own. Can't make it all alone. I built my dreams around you.